Thank you very much, Roy. Next up is Dr. Richard Rahn. He is the chairman of the Institute for Global Economic Growth and the advisory board of the European Center for Economic Growth, and a member of the board of directors of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. He is a visiting fellow with Heritage and Cato. He is also a member of the Mount Pelerin Society, and he serves on a number of boards of directors, including the American Council for Capital Formation, Small Businesses Entrepreneurship Council, Southeastern Legal Foundation, and Institute for Research on Economic Taxation. Richard Rahn.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Question for you. How many people has Al Gore needlessly killed? Serious question. Can you do the video for me?
Why is this deer attacking a U.S. senator? We're here live with Channel 10, trying to find out why these loggers are trying to destroy this beautiful forest. Let's see if we can find out more. Excuse me. Can you tell us why you're destroying this beautiful forest?
I'm just out here doing my job, just like anyone else, just like you.
But you and your workers are destroying millions of acres of this woodland, and the wildlife will have no place to go. Does the EPA know about this?
Know about it. They're demanding it. It's required by federal law.
What? Why?
Well, Congress said that 15% of all gasoline now has to be ethanol. So we have to grow corn, a lot of corn.
How much woodland must you destroy?
We're going to have to clear about 26 million acres.
Wow, that sounds like a lot.
It is a lot, a little more than the state of Indiana.
And how much corn will you need?
We're going to need about 4 billion bushels of corn to comply with the mandate.
And how many deer and other animals do you think you'll kill?
Probably many million. But on the plus side, fur coats and buckskin shirts are going to be cheap this year, although it may decimate the animal population. Not very environmentally friendly overall, I'd say.
Isn't there some other alternative?
Well, we could get the same amount of gasoline from drilling oil wells in a few hundred acres up in the Arctic tundra in Alaska, but then I'd be out of a job cutting down trees.
Even deer know that members of Congress need to be kicked for requiring millions of acres of forest to be destroyed in order to plant corn for ethanol, when drilling on a few acres of the barren Arctic would produce as much gasoline without destroying the wildlife habitat.
And I'd have to go back to my old job.
And what was that?
Exotic dancer.
Wow. Back to you at the studio.
The woods that were being filmed there are actually on my home in Great Falls, Virginia. And this small deer being out of there actually were photographs that I took of deer on my property. When we did this, we've done a whole series of these videos, I wanted to get the exact calculation. So with ANWR, I got the official projection numbers of the number of millions of barrels of oil we could get from it per day. Then we did the calculations of how much ethanol we would need to replace that amount of oil, and then calculated, of course ethanol is less efficient than gasoline, how many acres of farmland we would need, and it comes out just about the size of Indiana, not counting the cities, the roads, or anything, or a little more than the state of Maine. So these are real numbers. If people really understood what was going on, do you think they would vote for it? Because you say you're concerned about the tree huggers care about trees, they care about animals. Have you seen ANWR? I've been up in northern Alaska. We find actually the caribou like the pipeline because the pipeline is warm. It's a better place to mate. You probably can figure that out for your own lives. And so the caribou herds have been getting bigger and bigger. The whole problem, of course, is we do no cost-benefit analysis with all this. We've had the big price increases in food. You're all aware of that. It's all unnecessary. It comes from these mandates because we're diverting corn. You've heard a great deal about that here. We're driving up the price of energy for no inherently good reason. With these videos, you can get these, they're on YouTube, but there's also on the Center for Freedom and Prosperity website. That's just www.cfnp.org, and we have a series of videos there. Some very good ones recently done by my colleague Dan Mitchell on the Laffer curve and on global tax competitiveness. And some we've done in a short format like you've seen here, others in a little more lengthy 7-8 minutes of lectures by Dan, but are very well done. When I was a doctoral student at Columbia University several decades ago, I first became a skeptic of mathematical models. And at that point, of course, we had to learn how to start constructing these things. And I had, when working my way through college, I'd done marketing research. And I was quite well aware of how dirty much of the data was. We used to have talk about garbage in, garbage out. And that's, of course, exactly what you're getting. Now, if you think about things we try to model, we try to mathematically model all kinds of things, including the election campaign. We see the projections here that we've only got a couple of variables that we have to measure, and you see the error rates. Now, how many think Hillary's going to win today in Ohio? How many think Obama's going to win? Well, we'll know tonight, but you know, we're likely to get some surprises in some of the states because we usually do. This is a very simple model. I'm always impressed with the people who can take a robot, the Mars rover, land it on Mars, and get it pretty close to the precise point. We see the mathematicians really are wizards. But they're dealing with, they know the speed, the relative speed of the planets, they know their orbits, they know the various gravitational pulls. We've got this with a fair degree of accuracy, or highly accurate, and so we're able to do these magnificent feats. But now we start to get into more complex models. Let's take economics, my own field. Now, the models we use are far simpler than climate models. We have far fewer variables to deal with than a typical climate model. Let's take projections of the federal budget deficit. Now, you might remember in the early 1990s, the mantra was we were going to have $200 billion deficits as far as the eye can see. That was repeated over and over again. It wasn't until 18 months before we started having the budget surpluses in the late 1990s that the Clinton administration, the Congress was even aware we were going to have budget surpluses. They were taken totally by surprise. Their models did not show that. And then we're talking about only 18 months off. So then we had a big discussion about the problems with budget surpluses. Some of you who pay attention to economics might remember there was questions if we had big budget deficits, surpluses, the U.S. government with debt would be paid off. And of course, the debt is the backing for the money supply. And how would we have our money? And there wouldn't be any government bonds to buy, and we wouldn't have the benchmarks for the bonds. Remember, this was a serious discussion around 1999. Some of you remember this. Then, of course, suddenly things changed and we started running deficits again. Then the mantra was the deficit will be 4 to 5% of GDP forever or higher. Now, we did have a deficit that high in 2003. Then suddenly the deficit started coming down, even though the politicians were still talking about the big deficits. And last year we ran a deficit about 1.2% of GDP. You can actually run one of about 3% of GDP, and if you have normal economic growth around 3%, you can run the deficit that level forever, and the GDP debt ratio doesn't change. The point is, these economic models should be far easier to understand, far simpler, because you are using fewer variables, and we don't even get it close. Take the projections of changes in revenue from changes in tax rates. My favorite is capital gains. I've worked on this for many years. We've had a lot of changes of capital gains rates going up and going down. Each time the revenue received is inverse to the rate change, meaning when rates go up, the revenue goes down and vice versa. Those of you who are economists understand why. The Congress and much of the media always seems to be totally baffled by this. And even the people who do the revenue forecasting, Capitol Hill, the Joint Tax Committee, often have gotten the direction of their sign wrong. Not even, I mean, the magnitude's been off by hundreds of percent, but they can't even get the direction of their sign wrong, correct, part of the time. So then when people start telling me, I'm not a climatologist, but they say, we're going to model the Earth's climate. And I'm aware of some of the variables, and I thought Bill Gray's presentation this morning was great on that, all these variables, and that we know these with sufficient certainty, the relative magnitudes, and that we're going to be able to measure these and project things for 2100. We can't do a budget deficit forecast for the next 18 months. You tell me you're going to tell me the temperature of the planet in the year 2100? What's the budget deficit going to be in 2100? Well, it is, we get into this whole nonsense, and Roy's presentation here of getting into the technicalities. You don't have to go that far to realize that what we're doing here is they're drinking actually moonshine, policy moonshine. Yeah, the climate's changing. It always will. People adapt to it over the years. Structures are rebuilt. I grew up in Florida. I still hold property in Florida. I have an interest in how many hurricanes might be coming and how strong to build structures that I own in Florida. Structures along the beach, because of economic forces, are constantly rebuilt. And there were a lot of structures I remember as a kid along the beaches that used to be built out of wood and close to the beach. They've all been torn down and rebuilt now with much higher and stronger. But it's the economy, it drives this, because wooden beach houses are nowhere near as profitable as high-rise condominiums. And this is just the natural course of events. Again, government doesn't have to do anything. Just the normal development of mankind causes us to build bigger and better all the time. We get hit with a couple of hurricanes, and suddenly you're making a decision. You're putting up a new place or replacing windows. Do you spend extra money for the hurricane window or not? I don't need Washington to tell me to do this. In fact, if Washington didn't insure, and I was only paying private insurance, I would know exactly what to do. Let me give you some good news on the whole energy thing. I've had several different careers, and at one point I was chairman of a little semiconductor company, and I've had this fascination with science also. And having, even though not being a physical science myself, I am aware of the processes, and having supervised scientists and engineers, I know what they go through. The great beauty of these very high prices that we're now suffering is they're driving innovation at a much more rapid rate. There's two basic things that are happening, and that is finding alternative ways to produce power. And I think solar power is going to be a major contributor, particularly in places less than 30 degrees north latitude. Even with the existing efficiency of off-the-shelf solar panels, a 2,500 square foot house roof area will produce enough power to take care of the average family of 4. And so you're roughly about the average house size, of at least new houses, and even bigger than average family size, even with existing technology, which is only about 14% efficient. In the lab, they've gotten it up to 53% efficient. And it's just there's a time lag between the lab and when you start getting it into a commercial application. But this is going to come along quite quickly. In some parts of the world, and even in the US, solar power is already competitive. The other big advance is in battery technology. We all have our little BlackBerries here. We don't realize how much power is in a BlackBerry. There's a huge amount of electrical power here. These are all radio stations. Most people don't realize this. Remember when we were kids and there was great big radio stations? Well, it's now all in these things that we carry around in our pockets. So we can get the power density, and there's great advances being made in power density. Even by the year 2012, Nissan and Peugeot have said they're going to start mass producing pure electric cars, not hybrids, pure electrics. But it's coming along. I'm willing to bet 10 years from now, virtually every new car we purchase will be a total electric car. And the cost of the electricity is a fraction of what it costs in gasoline. I mean, if you have nuclear powered or even solar powered generation, the amount of cost to, quote, fill up your tank is going to be maybe 20% of what we cost in gasoline. With virtually all of our imports into the U.S. are liquid fuels, and virtually all that liquid fuel goes into the production or for motor transportation, trucks, buses, automobiles, airplanes, so forth. And 10 years from now, Saudi Arabia is not going to look that good economically. The changes are taking so fast, so rapidly, and we forget how quickly these changes can take place. 10 years ago, how many of you had BlackBerries? No one. And how does that revolutionize the world? The BlackBerry and the iPod and the iPhone and so forth. Totally revolutionized everything. It's happened within a very few number of years. And we're going to see that same type of thing when it comes to power generation, because what is happening with these stupid government policies you've heard about for the last 2 days, driven up the prices, high prices drive innovation, and ultimately that innovation, that scientific advance, is going to save our bacon from the tyrannical government. There are some things we can do from a public policy standpoint. I'm basically a public policy economist. I try to be practical about things we might do. One thing I think we could get through the Congress, because a lot of them don't understand the full ramifications of it, would be the right of private action against regulations. And I've written about this in a number of my columns, and others have gotten on board with it. And that would mean that if we have a regulation, it doesn't meet a cost-benefit test. And all these regulations that Roy and the others were talking about don't meet that type of test. That industry or nonprofit groups, the organizations represented here, could actually bring a suit against the federal government insisting that that be overturned. There are provisions right now. The federal government is supposed to do a cost-benefit test on any new regulation. And for major regulations, they say 100 million or more, they're supposed to have these things operative. But there's been really no enforcement mechanism. And we ought to lobby, it's probably hopeless to lobby Obama or Hillary, but at least for John McCain to put that into his platform. Because most people will say, yeah, we ought to have cost-benefit analysis, particularly after seeing the big rise in food prices and fuel prices before we put in new regulations. Seems reasonable. Even if you're an environmentalist, tree hugger, you should want reasonable cost-benefit analysis. So that's one change I think we can lobby through. And I urge all of you to push on that. But don't despair. 10 years from now, things will be better. Of course, at that point, then the politicians will try to figure out how to regulate it. But fortunately, Washington is very slow. and the genius of our founding fathers. They made the process slow, and technology can go faster than the politicians, so not all is lost. Thank you very much.